It could be a job application, a creative project. Imagine you have a deadline tomorrow, the kind of deadline that could change your life. It could be a job application, a creative project, a conversation you've been putting off for months. You know exactly what you need to do. You have the skills to do it. And yet, you find yourself watching videos, reorganizing your desk, making your fifth cup of coffee, doing anything, except the one thing that matters. Now, imagine that feeling multiplied across an entire lifetime. The most brilliant mind in human history died knowing he had wasted most of it. Leonardo da Vinci. Born in 1452 in a small Italian village, he would go on to sketch the first helicopter, design a solar power concentrator, theorize about plate tectonics, and produce two of the most analyzed paintings in the history of humanity. He possessed a mind so vast, so luminous, that scholars are still discovering new things in his notebooks after his death. He was almost by every measurable standard a chronic procrastinator. He spent 11 years on the Mona Lisa and still considered it unfinished. He accepted a commission for a monumental battle scene from the Florentine government and worked on it for years before abandoning it completely. He left roughly 3/4 of everything he ever began incomplete. His notebooks, over 7,000 pages of them, are filled with ideas he would never develop, inventions he would never build, answers to questions he spent decades circling but never directly approaching. When he died in 1519 at 67 years old, the man who could see the future of science left behind memories and enchanting presence. And here's the question that nobody has satisfactorily answered for 500 years. Why? For most of human history, we understood procrastination the same way we understood most failures of will. It was a character flaw, a moral failing, laziness over busyness. Even today, the common cultural verdict is unchanged. If you procrastinate, you are undisciplined. You need to try harder. You need to want it more. But here's the first crack in that story. In 2007, a researcher named Piers Steele published what became one of the most comprehensive analyses of procrastination ever conducted. After reviewing hundreds of studies and surveying thousands of people across decades of research, he arrived at a conclusion that should have shocked the field into silence. Procrastination was not correlated with low intelligence or low motivation. In many cases, the most severe procrastinators were people who genuinely cared the most about their work. People who wanted desperately to do a good job. Think about a student who has been putting off a term paper for 3 weeks. In popular imagination, we picture someone who doesn't care, lounging around, indifferent to their own future. But in reality, if you sat that student down and asked them what was genuinely happening in the hours they were supposed to be writing, you would hear something very different. A deep, low frequency anxiety. A vague, formless sense of dread that couldn't be named or precisely located. An almost physical resistance every time they sat down to begin. This is not laziness. This is something else entirely. In 2013, researcher Fuskia Siroas proposed a theory that would fundamentally reframe the entire conversation. Procrastination, she argued, is not a time management problem. It is an emotion regulation problem. When you procrastinate, you are not failing to manage your schedule. You are failing to manage an uncomfortable feeling. And the task you're avoiding is not actually the source of the problem. It is merely the trigger. The problem lives somewhere much deeper. And what lives there, what has always lived there, is the real story. There are two separate systems living inside your skull. The first system is ancient. It has been with your species for hundreds of millions of years. It lives primarily in a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala and the surrounding limbic architecture. Its only job The single mission it has been optimizing for since before your ancestors stood upright is to manage your emotional survival. It is fast. It is ferociously powerful. It does not think in language or logic. It thinks in sensations, safety, danger, pleasure, pain, and most critically, now. The second system is newer. It lives primarily in the prefrontal cortex, the thick wrinkled tissue just behind your forehead. This is the seat of everything that makes you distinctly human. Planning, reasoning, delayed gratification. The understanding that the report due in 3 weeks is more important than the video currently buffering on your screen. This system is slower, more deliberate, and vastly more fragile than we would like to believe. These two systems are in constant competition, and the older one wins far more often. Neuroscientist Elliot Berkman has described this dynamic as fundamentally asymmetric. The limbic system, when activated, can essentially activate the prefrontal cortex, overwhelming your capacity for rational planning with a wave of emotional signal so intense that your logical mind goes partially offline. The pathways that should be directing your behavior toward long-term goals get drowned under a current of feeling that simply wants you to feel okay right now. This is what happens in the body of a procrastinator in real time. The moment you open your laptop to start that project, the one you've been avoiding for 2 weeks, your brain doesn't register a task. Your brain registers a threat. And that threat activates a series of neurological events that you experience as resistance, sudden fatigue, a mysterious compulsion to reorganize your bookshelf, or an urgent need to research something completely unrelated at 11 o'clock at night. You are not being lazy. You are running a survival response. But here's the question that held researchers back for years.
It's become a movement, a seismic shift in the AI revolution. I'm looking at my computer. These are real people, real businesses having real exponential results using AI when you use it effectively and efficiently and you're not overwhelmed. These aren't tech geniuses. They're real people like you. They just made one decision. They decided to join what I believe is the greatest AI community on the planet. It's called the AI.
That held researchers back for years. What exactly is the threat? What is so genuinely frightening about a blank document, or an unanswered email, or a conversation you've been meaning to start for 6 months? The answer, when it finally emerged from the research, was more uncomfortable than almost anyone expected. Because it required researchers, and it requires all of us, to stop looking at the tasks people avoid and start looking at the feelings they're running from. And those feelings have a very specific name. We will understand it from a story, my story. I am 25 years old and my medical internship has just started. Most of my days are consumed by hospital ward and preparing for my license examination. But for the past 3 years, I have been trying to make my YouTube channel. I have the entire folder of YouTube on my laptop in which I have written my ideas of different videos. I have bought 2 courses on storytelling, read books on storytelling. I have done everything except to begin my YouTube journey. If someone asks me why, I tell them I am perfectionist or I am busy. But here's the truth, what I cannot say out loud, even to myself. I am terrified. Not terrified of writing the script. Terrified of the finished script. Because a finished script can be read, and then it can be judged. Terrified of what if I fail? What if people don't like my work? As long as the script is unfinished, it is still perfect. It still contains all possible futures. The moment it's done, those futures collapse into one reality. And that one reality might not be good enough. This is the paradox at the core of perfectionism-driven procrastination. The very thing you care about most. the thing you've wound your sense of self around most tightly, becomes the most impossible thing to do. Not despite how much you care, but precisely because of it. Psychologists have a clinical name for this pattern. It is called self-handicapping. By never quite finishing, never quite starting, never quite committing, you protect the belief about yourself that matters most. If you never fully attempt the thing you truly care about, you can never truly fail at it. The potential remains intact and untested. Leonardo da Vinci grew up illegitimate. The son of a Florentine notary and a peasant woman, he was excluded from the professional institutions that defined success in Renaissance Italy. He couldn't attend university in the formal sense. He couldn't enter the guilds his father occupied. His entire life was, in some profound way, a sustained attempt to prove his worth through work so undeniable that no institution could dismiss it. So consider this question. What if the unfinished paintings were not a failure of discipline? What if they were a defense mechanism, a strategy developed over decades of keeping potential permanently ahead of output? A way of saying, my capacity is boundless, and as long as I never fully commit it to a single canvas, no one, not even I, can tell me it isn't. But we are only halfway to the real answer, because beneath the perfectionism, beneath the self-handicapping, there is a discovery that makes all of this look simple, and it comes from the most unexpected direction: a neuroscience lab and a brain scanner. In 2011, a researcher conducted an experiment that quietly became one of the most disturbing studies in behavioral science. He put participants in a functional MRI machine, a brain scanner that maps neural activity in real time, and asked them to think about themselves as they were right now. Then, he asked them to think about themselves 10 years in the future. The results were startling in their clarity and unsettling in their implications. When participants thought about their future selves, the brain regions that activated were not the same regions that activated when thinking about their present selves. Your brain does not fully recognize your future self as you. It recognizes your future self as someone else. When you tell yourself you'll start the project on Monday, when you convince yourself that future you will be more motivated, more rested, more prepared, you are, neurologically speaking, not making a promise to yourself. You are delegating a burden to a stranger. You are handing a difficult or uncomfortable task to someone your brain has no particular emotional investment in protecting.
So with Draw to Know It, you learn how to draw out a structure. That gives you an internal schema. And then when you face the structure itself, be it a cadaveric section or an MRI that you're scrolling through, you can now locate what you're looking for in an intellectual way. You have an internal compass. That's the beauty of this process. Science is a foreign language. And what we do at Draw to Know It is that we make that foreign language
to someone your brain has no particular emotional investment in protecting. And then Monday arrives. That stranger has become you, and you are left holding a debt you don't remember taking on, in a state of motivation you never actually had, facing a task that has somehow grown heavier every day it was deferred. This explains something every chronic procrastinator knows intuitively, but cannot name. That eerie, persistent feeling of being out of sync with your own timeline, of arriving late to your own life, of watching the months and years accumulate with a low, steady bewilderment about how it keeps happening when you keep meaning for it to stop. You are not failing to keep promises to yourself. You are failing to recognize that your future self is you. But here is where the story takes its sharpest turn yet. Because everything we've discussed so far, the emotion regulation, the threat responses, the perfectionism, the temporal disconnection, all of it assumes that procrastination is something that happens to people, a malfunction, a glitch in otherwise functional wiring. What if, for some people, procrastination is not a malfunction at all? What if it is a strategy, not a conscious one, but a deliberate one, deployed precisely because it works? In 1978, two social psychologists named Stephen Bergla and Edward Jones published a paper that introduced one of the most counterintuitive concepts in the history of behavioral science. They called it self-handicapping, not the passive perfectionism adjacent kind discussed earlier. They described a pattern observed consistently in people who had built their entire sense of identity around their performance and their potential. When these individuals faced an important challenge, a test, a performance, a project that genuinely mattered, they would create obstacles for themselves before they even began. They would stay out late the night before a crucial presentation. They would fail to prepare for an exam they desperately needed to pass. They would engineer, through procrastination and avoidance, a context in which failure, if it came, had a ready explanation. Because if you fail when you were sleep-deprived, unprepared, distracted, rushed, overwhelmed, that failure can be explained. It wasn't really you who failed. It was the circumstances. Your true potential remains untested, pristine, and protected. But if you prepare fully, commit completely, give every honest part of yourself to the attempt, and still fall short, there is nowhere left to hide. That failure is you. Not you tired, not you stressed, not you running on empty. You at your best, found wanting. And for a person who has organized their entire sense of self around the belief that they are capable of something extraordinary, that is not a risk they can consciously take. So they arrange a softer landing. They build themselves a trapdoor. And that trapdoor has a name, and it sounds completely reasonable to everyone who hears it. I'll start tomorrow. I just need more time. The conditions aren't right yet. Research suggests this pattern is not rare pathology. It is remarkably common, particularly among students at demanding institutions, among professionals in competitive fields, among artists and creators who have built an identity around what they might one day produce. The more capable the person, the higher the stakes of truly trying. Because the gap between their potential and their actual output is the one thing standing between them and a verdict they cannot survive. So the gap remains, carefully maintained, year after year, and the gap slowly becomes the shape of a life. There is a stage of procrastination that psychologists call the doom cycle. It is the final descent, and it is defined not by avoidance, but by something closer to paralysis. The initial avoidance generates relief. You feel better, briefly, for having escaped the anxiety of the task. That relief is immediate and genuine and neurologically rewarding. Your brain files it. Avoidance felt better than attempting, but that relief lasts only moments before it is followed by guilt. And the guilt now becomes the new thing to escape. So you procrastinate more, which generates more guilt, which requires more escape, which generates shame, which is even more painful than guilt, which requires even deeper distraction. And somewhere inside this accelerating spiral, something changes in the person's relationship to the task itself. It is no longer simply a task. It has become a monument. A physical structure made of accumulated failures. Every morning, woken up saying, "Today is the day," and then not doing it. Every promise made to oneself and quietly broken. Every version of a future self imagined and then silently abandoned. The task, by this stage, carries all of that weight.
Welcome to the world's largest invention factory. In here, we design, test, and produce hundreds of new inventions. You may have heard of some, like the can pump, the hover creeper, or twister bolts, which have millions of units sold. And you can find lots of our inventions associated with big brand names like Paula Deen, Pepsi, Disney, and more. But I'm getting
Carries all of that weight. Opening the document is not about writing words anymore. It is about walking into a museum of self-betrayal. No act of willpower is strong enough to walk in there willingly every single morning. And this is what the doom cycle reveals. The truth that recontextualizes every piece of this story. Chronic procrastination is not primarily about tasks. It is about identity. It is about a person who has constructed a self-image around their unrealized potential and who has discovered, in the most painful possible way, that the potential is easier and safer and more beautiful to live with than the attempt. We are almost at the revelation, but before we arrive there, I need you to hold one question. What if procrastination isn't a problem to be solved? What if it has been a message the whole time, waiting to be read? At its deepest, most essential level, it is a grief response. Grief for something that hasn't happened yet. Grief for the version of yourself that you imagined you would be by now. The person who would have started sooner, tried harder, lived more fully, been braver. That version of you is not dead. It has been deferred. Year after year, one postponed beginning after another, it has been placed just slightly out of reach. And a part of you, some very old, very quiet, very honest part of you, knows this and mourns it in silence. This is why the task feels so crushing, even before you begin, because of what it reminds you of. Every time you sit down to start something you've been avoiding, you are not merely beginning a task. You are standing at the edge of the gap between who you are and who you meant to become. And the pain of that distance is not motivating. It is not clarifying. It is, in the truest sense, devastating. And so you close the laptop. You choose the feeling of okay over the feeling of honest. And the gap grows, invisibly, a little wider. Leonardo da Vinci, in one of his private notebooks, wrote, "I have offended God and mankind because my work didn't reach the quality it should have." He wrote this near the very end of his life. After the Vitruvian Man and the helicopter sketches, and the Mona Lisa, and the Last Supper. After all of it, after a lifetime of achievement that would humble anyone alive, he looked back and felt, above every other emotion, the weight of what he had not done. This is the procrastinator's tragedy, not the things left undone. The impossible standard against which every beginning was measured before it was allowed to exist. The belief, never fully examined, never directly challenged, that anything short of perfect was a form of failure. That trying honestly and falling short was more dangerous than never trying at all. But here is the revelation that changes the entire story. That belief is not a symptom of the wound. It is the wound itself. The procrastinator is not afraid of failure in some abstract future tense. The procrastinator has already failed, in the court of their own imagination, before the first word is written. They have pre-failed. Silently, privately, comprehensively. And the avoidance is not the source of their suffering. It is a misguided, human, heartbreaking attempt to protect themselves from a judgment they have already, in some deep chamber of themselves, accepted as inevitable. This means, and I need you to hear this carefully, that the cure for procrastination is not discipline. It is not a more rigid system, or a stricter schedule, or a better app. or a louder alarm. The cure, if there is one, begins somewhere far more difficult and far more necessary. It begins with grief, with sitting quietly with the version of yourself you haven't yet become, and allowing yourself to mourn it, without punishment, without the usual spiral of shame, with understanding that the gap between who you are and who you meant to be is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence of your aspiration. And that aspiration, that ache, that restless reaching towards something larger than your current self is not something to be ashamed of. It is the most human thing about you. There is a concept in Japanese philosophy called ma. It refers to the space between things, the space between notes in a piece of music, the emptiness between objects placed in a room. In Japanese aesthetics, ma is not understood as an absence. It is understood as a presence of its own, the place where meaning gathers, where possibility breathes, where the next thing is already beginning to form.
Hello there, I'm Alan, and this is the demo. Let's talk about how to use Thank You. Yes, you can absolutely use it to send custom thank you messages, or event invites, updates, solicitations, anniversaries, birthdays, you name it. Thank you is only limited by your imagination.
Being a quant at a finance firm is one of the most lucrative and exciting careers out there. Many high-frequency trading firms and hedge funds pay junior traders a first-year total compensation of around $575,000. Most quant traders retire around their mid-30s. It's a very meritocratic industry. You eat what you kill. The issue is that there is no accurate or comprehensive resource to learn how to get and ace quant interviews. This is where Quant Blueprint comes in. Quant Blueprint teaches you the fundamental technical math, logic, probability, and statistics concepts, and the extensive interview strategies that have helped hundreds of candidates consistently pass these otherwise very difficult quant interviews. We have worked directly with recruiters at top firms and asked them what they look for on resumes. Not only will we teach you how to ace the interviews, we're going to teach you the secrets of what you need to add to your resume to get interviews. Then we'll teach you the secret alternate ways of actually getting the interview. You'll learn how to get directly in touch with hiring managers and quant recruiters to secure the interview within a week. That's right. No more online applications. Next, we're going to walk you step by step through the secretive interview processes for these roles. Our group of a dozen quants has sourced hundreds of the most frequently asked interview questions and created walkthroughs so you'll learn the theory from the ground up and develop a robust intuition to give 10 out of 10 answers to these questions in an interview setting. Then, we're going to provide you with the over 500 actual interview question bank. This is a goldmine. Our students have told us that their real interview questions were many times word-for-word questions that are in this question bank. No other candidates have access to this, so this will give you a huge leg up. This is barely scratching the surface of what Quant Blueprint offers. Our curriculum, however, is not designed to be easy. It's going to take effort on your part, but we will take you from start to finish so that you can ace every quant interview that is thrown at you. It doesn't matter whether you're currently a student, engineer, data scientist, or even already in the finance industry. We will get you a high-paying career in quant finance. What are you waiting for? We are so excited to work with you.
Perhaps the chronic procrastinator is, in some sense, a person who has mistaken the space between things for the thing itself, who has learned to live inside the gap, inside the space, inside the interval between who they are and who they intend to become, and found it simultaneously the most frightening and the most comfortable place to inhabit. Because in that gap, everything is still possible. Nothing has been attempted and found ordinary. Nothing has been risked and lost. The psychologists will continue to map the mechanics of this condition with increasing precision. They will find better interventions, more targeted frameworks, more effective therapeutic approaches, and those things will matter. But the last word on procrastination does not belong to science. It belongs to every person who has ever sat alone in the blue light of a screen, the hour growing late, the task still waiting, and felt underneath the guilt and the circular self-recrimination and the familiar shame, something quieter than all of it. Something that, in an honest moment, in the silence between one distraction and the next, sounds less like laziness and more like love. Love for the work not yet done. Love for the life not yet lived. Love for the version of themselves that exists only in the clean, unbroken space between beginning and ending. Perfect there and only there, and perhaps nowhere else. That love is not weakness. It never was. The only question, the one Leonardo could not answer, the one I still circle in my apartment every evening, the one that may be sitting very quietly at the back of your mind right now, patient as it has always been, is this: how much longer are you willing to love the dream more than you love the attempt?
Your birth remains entirely forgotten. You cannot recall your initial spoken word, your earliest footstep, or that inaugural moment someone cradled you while you gazed up at their eyes. You lack any recollection of discovering what dogs were, nor that initial taste of sugary foods, nor the exact second you realized your hands were attached to yourself. Yet here is the truth. They occurred. They actually happened. You existed then. You remained aware. You stood sensing emotions, absorbing events, and interpreting a completely strange environment with incredible speed. Then everything simply faded away. All events preceding age 3 disappear for nearly every adult. Certain individuals retain one blurry piece surrounding age 4, perhaps celebrations, an automobile journey, or specific scents. However, those earliest phases, representing the most intense window of neurological expansion and education your mind shall ever endure, reside in almost completely absolute silence. Zero recollections, blank. Therefore, where did they vanish? Since this situation differs greatly from misplacing your house keys, this represents a methodical, practically complete deletion regarding the opening chapter of life. For an extended period, no researcher could adequately clarify why this occurs. Today we possess specific explanations, and they prove incredibly captivating. Let us begin discussing the basics. Were you actually sentient back then? Did you genuinely experience anything meriting preservation? Absolutely. Without question. Babies do not simply absorb incoming sensory data. They emerge as engaged, inquisitive, and emotionally reactive creatures almost immediately. Neonates easily identify their mother's vocals within hours of delivery. They perceived it during gestation, meaning the recollection of those sounds remains firmly imprinted before they have even witnessed sunlight. After several days, preferences emerge. They react distinctively toward familiar visages, compared to totally unrecognized faces. They cry distinctively regarding starvation, bodily pain, or isolation. Somebody is clearly inside. An authentic perceiving awareness remains active from the initial onset. However, none of those memories remain, not within formats you may easily retrieve today. The primary significant hint for comprehending this phenomenon emerges by examining what recall truly represents and how brains construct it. Recollection is no recording. This represents perhaps the greatest crucial concept to grasp regarding how human brains archive events, and it seems illogical. Whenever an event affects you, your mind avoids pressing record buttons while storing away literal moving visual clips. Its actual process proves considerably messier while being increasingly fascinating. Various components comprising any event are analyzed through distinct cerebral sectors simultaneously. All sentimental feelings travel one direction. Physical sensory inputs travel somewhere different. The chronological progression, meaning the storyline of actual occurrences, travels somewhere completely separated. For individuals to form an accessible personal recollection, meaning those memories reflecting that personal presence and direct involvement perspective, every single scattered fragment must become woven tightly and then solidified into one durable, highly reachable psychological bundle. Such complex processing demands an intricate cerebral component named hippocampus. This hippocampus acts as your neural cataloger. This specific zone successfully connects those dispersed fragments from events into one unified entity and stores it where you might subsequently fetch it. Lacking proper hippocampal activation, people may analyze situations. They could perhaps feel deeply impacted emotionally, yet they shall lack any aware storyline recollection about them that they may intentionally retrieve. Consider this vital factor. This hippocampal region, inside human babies, remains severely unformed, not merely delayed, not nearly complete, but drastically, operationally unfinished during their initial living years. Those nerve cells exist, yet those pathways linking them, meaning that thick, intricate web of pathways facilitating effective recall storage and recovery, remains largely unconstructed. This hippocampus experiences massive maturation throughout those primary 2 or 3 developmental years, and certain sectors keep evolving deep into the teenage phase. An infant witnessing anything gorgeous, terrifying, or delightful closely resembles attempting to capture some digital film utilizing a camera which currently lacks an inserted storage drive. Its optics function perfectly. That microchip operates smoothly, yet zero destination exists for the incoming media. Consequently, those recollections never materialize at the very beginning. Not within any recoverable storytelling manner, meaning not those versions someone might extract 3 decades later to mentally review. That constitutes an initial segment regarding this complex explanation. However, it remains notably incomplete, since this fails to clarify why numerous individuals cannot retrieve their recollections surrounding age 2 or 3, despite their hippocampus being substantially further matured during that time frame compared with infancy. Here is where things become significantly more fascinating. Another secondary element exists, and this relates closely toward something researchers term neurogenesis. Your mind generates fresh nerve cells endlessly forever. This idea remained heavily debated for many decades. That outdated belief suggested that humans entered reality possessing every single neuron they might ever utilize, and nothing more. Such conclusions proved to be inaccurate. Fresh nerve cells spawn perpetually, specifically inside that hippocampus. However, observe this complication. During early toddlerhood, the speed of neural creation within your hippocampus remains phenomenally rapid, significantly faster than any subsequent stage of existence. An infantile mind continually manufactures fresh hippocampal cells, matching speeds which absolutely never occur among mature adults, while every single new cell must become incorporated seamlessly throughout that established network. These cells must locate their position, establish linkages, and integrate throughout this machinery. This incorporation procedure proves chaotic. It disrupts pre-established pathways. It fundamentally reconstructs your storage methodology. Consider the situation like so. Visualize possessing an archive. Rather than an orderly, massive archive, consider a newly disordered one installing thousands of fresh bookcases every single afternoon. Volumes keep arriving much quicker than anyone could accurately organize them. That structural framework constantly shifts, while fresh wings get constructed. Previous manuscripts rarely remain exactly wherever they were placed, since these units constantly shift positions. This mirrors your hippocampus throughout those initial phases of living. This exact mechanism, which renders early minds exceptionally capable of absorbing knowledge, meaning that rapid expansion and continuous production of fresh cells, serves concurrently as the barrier rendering it virtually unachievable to solidify permanent historical records. Swift neuronal reproduction sacrifices memory solidification to maximize sheer educational potential. This baby mind remains fine-tuned toward gathering novel data utilizing peak velocity, rather than indexing things within formats which might become easily retrievable many decades later. You absorb knowledge quicker than every grown-up ever might. However, the penalty for such swiftness involved losing everything. Furthermore, another tertiary element exists, representing the most bizarre component among these various reasons: vocabulary. That seems quite basic initially. Naturally, infants cannot construct purely spoken recollections. They lack spoken vocabulary completely. However, this situation runs profoundly deeper, since that correlation linking speech with remembering proves far closer than everyday individuals understand. Personal historical recall, meaning specific thoughts of recalling past actions from childhood, remains profoundly and architecturally bound to our verbal abilities. Not merely since individuals require phrasing for sharing pasts with external audiences, but because that inward sensation surrounding holding a thought, mentally rewinding that event, and recognizing how it affected yourself rather than another person, this entire conscious sensation gets regulated through speech across dimensions which prove exceedingly difficult to completely disentangle. Whenever you recall events, you essentially recount them inwardly toward your soul. You are building a tale, a timeline, an identity navigating across temporal spans. Moreover, this storytelling capability, meaning your power to formulate tales featuring oneself as the hero, develops alongside linguistics. Toddlers possess distinct feelings of identity. Scientific studies have proven this. However, this identity occupies current moments, a consciousness focused only upon immediate ongoing sensations. Projecting this identity backwards across history toward an accessible private background, creating your historical persona, absolutely demands linguistics for support. Lacking vocabulary, tales remain impossible. Minus a tale, storytellers remain absent. Consequently, lacking any storyteller, nobody exists to function as the protagonist of these thoughts. You cannot recall your own presence unless you already possess a solid verbally constructed understanding of oneself. Global sociological research confirms this. Toddlers whose speech emerges belatedly similarly experience delayed beginnings regarding their personal historical recall. Multilingual youths frequently maintain their sharpest childhood recollections via whatever dialect they utilized back then, despite them seldom speaking those particular dialects throughout their mature lives. Individuals who mastered manual signing as their initial dialect demonstrate identical early forgetfulness trends to auditory youths mastering verbal speech, indicating that auditory speech is not mandatory, but rather linguistics serving as an intellectual framework remains crucial. These terms do not simply help articulate your past. They function fundamentally regarding how such reminiscences get constructed initially upon creation. Therefore, we now understand three interconnected causes: underformed hippocampi, rapid neural spawning hindering solidification, alongside a void of vocabulary as an organizational backbone for narratives. Each element remains valid. Every factor occurs concurrently together. Combined, these generate a span of almost complete forgetfulness, which blankets the highly influential initial phase of human existence. However, here is what seems incredibly bizarre. Those events you cannot recall still molded you. This represents an aspect which individuals frequently struggle to completely accept. Those toddler phases have vanished from any deliberately accessible recollection, yet they have definitely not departed from within. Whatever occurred during those stages produced imprints, profound architectural marks which actively dictate who you remain today presently. Those bonding habits you developed alongside your guardians throughout that initial phase of existence, deciding if you believed this environment proved secure and attentive versus chaotic and untrustworthy, become stored not through recollections, rather as subconscious assumptions, modes of living, and sentimental reactions operating entirely beneath awareness. Whenever you received reliable comfort whilst weeping, your neurological network internalized on a physiological scale that agony remains fleeting and assistance stays readily accessible. This presumption dictates how you react toward pressure during adulthood, how rapidly you might pacify your own nerves, and how deeply you believe situations shall resolve favorably. Whenever you received unpredictable attention, or remained weeping devoid of solace, your neurological pathways absorbed something alternative, ignoring literal flashbacks, adopting an ingrained baseline adjustment, dictating exactly how secure society truly appears, and precisely how heavily you might depend upon surrounding fellow humans. Zero aspects of this remain reachable as some narrative you might verbally recount. You cannot recall that exact evening you wept while nobody arrived, nor that precise dawn someone embraced you providing absolute security. Yet these evenings and dawns accumulated, forming something profound, an attitude regarding survival, which you bear while remaining unaware you lug it around. This represents what therapists intend whenever they discuss subconscious retention, in contrast against deliberate conscious recall. Deliberate recollection represents the variety individuals may intentionally retrieve and articulate. Subconscious retention signifies the type residing throughout your physique, your sentimental responses, your instinctive beliefs regarding how partnerships function, and if you truly merit receiving proper affection constantly. Childhood forgetfulness deletes your intentional recollections. It preserves your subconscious retention entirely unharmed. You lose the events, you retain the teachings. The complication remains, you cannot analyze teachings you never realized you absorbed. You simply react using them, while questioning why you handle specific scenarios the exact way you manage. Next, we should discuss fabricated thoughts, because here is where things become unsettling. Several among those oldest flashbacks you believe you possess remain likely untrue, neither warped nor magnified, instead wholly manufactured, assembled via your mind, using pictures, anecdotes, alongside frequent retellings, before getting archived exactly as though they constituted authentic lived events. Such phenomena stand heavily proven across cognitive studies, and it feels profoundly disturbing the initial moment you accept it. Here is its mechanism. Your relatives possess a photograph featuring you during your second birthday celebration. You have viewed this portrait endlessly throughout your childhood. Grown-ups shared the tale regarding that specific celebration. What occurred? Who attended then? Your reaction toward the frosted pastry. You absorbed those narratives so frequently until your intellect ultimately constructed a cognitive simulation depicting this occurrence. Subsequently, during an arbitrary moment, your intellect stored this cognitive simulation inside the exact location housing real events. Currently, it feels like a flashback. It bears the texture of a recollection. You would explain it representing past thoughts if anybody inquired. Yet what you truly retrieve is some fabrication assembled using outside details, rather than authentic fragments from actual situations. Scientists have proven that completely fabricated flashbacks regarding situations which never transpired whatsoever might become inserted into humans via continuous prompting alongside cultural validation, while these artificial thoughts remain experientially identical compared against authentic ones. Assuming this proves achievable utilizing invented scenarios, the potential regarding real happenings getting rebuilt and erroneously archived as first-hand reflections appears highly likely. Ponder upon that oldest flashback you possess right currently, that exact one you would grab if requested. Whence did it originate originally? Have you recalled it forever, spontaneously, or had somebody spoken to you regarding this? Does there exist imagery or relative folklore which your household recounts during holiday gatherings? An honest response among numerous individuals remains that they cannot feel certain. Moreover, this doubt proves quite unnerving, yet remains crucial. Your recollection regarding your personal oldest phase represents, at least partially, a tale outside humans shared concerning your actions, which you eventually assimilated into your reality. This presents an unusual metaphysical dilemma. Whenever a thought seems vibrant alongside emotionally authentic, while operating identically toward an actual recollection across any detectable metric, should we care whether it happens to represent an artificial assembly? Certain individuals answer negatively. This thought fulfills an identical purpose regardless of its genesis. Others consider things profoundly confusing, since the identity you believe you maintain relies partially upon narratives describing your own personal history. Furthermore, should these tales prove adopted instead of recalled, what does this signify regarding whoever you truly represent? There exists no simple conclusion there, yet it merits deep consideration. let us return towards something considerably tangible. Why might specific individuals retain older flashbacks than strangers? Because this happens. Academic studies continually reveal disparities. Many citizens experience what seem like authentic reflections originating from as young as 2. Some retain nothing preceding 5 or 6. An average commencement regarding trustworthy personal historical recall occurs around 3 unto 3.5 years. However, the spectrum proves broad. Multiple elements appear to dictate this. Societal background represents one aspect. Research contrasting stateside youngsters against youths originating from societies whose guardians less consistently participate within cooperative remembering, discussing with toddlers regarding mutual historical events, interrogating them deeply regarding whatever they recall, retelling their personal backgrounds back unto them, indicate how societal habits surrounding recall conversations drastically impact when youngsters start generating accessible personal historical narratives. Within environments whose guardians regularly utter phrases stating, "Recall whenever we visited that ocean recently. What things were visible?" wherein thought becomes actively practiced while publicly validated, youngsters cultivate quicker, alongside vastly more intricate personal historical flashbacks. This communal habit, involving reflecting cooperatively, instructs youths that their observations remain valuable for archiving, while providing structural storytelling frameworks to accomplish this. Recollection, we discover, basically functions partially as communal talent. Moreover, similar to all interpersonal talents, it matures quicker whenever deliberately rehearsed and supported. Gender represents another variable, although the explanations remain complicated. Research has discovered that typically, females recount older alongside highly sentimentally descriptive youth flashbacks compared against males. If this remains physiological, or the result from varied cultural conditioning regarding sentimental displays and storytelling, or any mixture combining these, stays fiercely contested. Additionally, we evaluate trauma. Profound psychological events, especially terrifying moments, occasionally plant residues which normal thoughts lack. Our amygdala, human neurology's sentimental alert network, remains engaged and operational significantly sooner during maturation than our hippocampus. Terrified reactions, extreme sentimental peaks, may occasionally deposit leftovers, which manifest subsequently through sensations or bodily responses lacking any corresponding storyline recall. Individuals could grow mysteriously nervous inside medical centers, or experience some unexplainable wave of comfort near the aroma from particular meals, while ignoring the reason. Your sentiment recalled that occurrence even though your mind forgot. Here is a topic which rarely receives adequate conversation regarding this subject: slumber. Thought solidification, meaning that mechanism where novel events become transformed toward durable, permanent recollections, occurs overwhelmingly throughout rest. Particularly amidst deep rest alongside REM cycles, whenever our intellect fundamentally reviews and structures those daily happenings, reinforcing vital pathways while eliminating useless links. Babies slumber constantly. Any neonate rests 16 until 18 hours daily, and this slumber structure remains drastically unique compared against mature resting. They dedicate significantly higher portions among resting periods inhabiting dynamic REM-style conditions than grown-ups maintain. Throughout decades, scientists presumed this represented simply some physiological anomaly surrounding maturation, carrying zero specific importance regarding recall. That assumption appears it could prove incorrect. Certain scientists currently theorize that these massive quantities regarding dynamic resting during babyhood fulfill one vital evolutionary purpose: avoiding archiving isolated flashbacks, instead fortifying those underlying frameworks which support intelligence. Understanding how expressions operate, how tones sound, how material items interact throughout environments, how communal exchanges progress. Any toddler slumbering near 18 hours avoids squandering their clock. That toddler resting through 18 hours constructs an underlying framework which every future action shall operate atop. Avoiding storing specific documents. Downloading your programming, meaning a consequence surrounding this, involves those occurrences transpiring throughout those conscious periods, avoiding becoming archived like flashbacks, exactly because they provide utility toward a significantly deeper purpose. They get transformed toward infrastructure instead of tales. toward competency rather than fables. You cannot recall discovering how vision works, yet you perceive. You cannot recall discovering how items remain dense alongside enduring, yet you comprehend this immediately and seamlessly every moment of your existence. You cannot recollect discovering translating expressions alongside tones regarding sentimental context, yet you perform this instinctively countless amounts of times, daily lacking any deliberate mental exertion. Everything about this became absorbed throughout those years you totally forget. Things simply became stored using an alternative blueprint than those flashbacks you presently access. Profounder, vastly enduring, incredibly basic. Therefore, what does this entire situation signify regarding yourself today currently? This implies how those initial phases of your existence remained useful even though you cannot successfully recall them. They proved through numerous perspectives, the most critical periods concerning your whole life. Those spans whenever this structural blueprint regarding whoever you represent got established upon depths further than typical recollection may ever penetrate. The human you remain, the methods you bond with individuals, the manner you react regarding unpredictability, elements that pacify you, alongside elements that disturb you, the instincts you cannot justify, and those terrors which appear to emerge from absolute nowhere. Every aspect of this possesses origins across a phase of your history remaining entirely unseen by your active intellect. You remain constructed through events you cannot retrieve. This seems either horrific or emancipating, depending on your personal perspective. Regarding that horrific aspect, you cannot inspect your bedrock. You cannot travel backward to review those initial 3 years for comprehending why you operate how you currently function. These impacts remain genuine. They influence you continuously while residing completely beyond your deliberate grasp. Regarding that emancipating angle, the lack of deliberate recollection guarantees the lack of rigid storylines. You lack any tale you recount inwardly concerning those ancient periods. Therefore, this implies the tale remains fluid. These subconscious behaviors may become altered, not through recalling since absolutely nothing awaits retrieval, rather utilizing fresh happenings which upgrade those outdated settings. Counseling, secure partnerships, reliable novel proof demonstrating this environment functions differently than what your infant mind originally decided blindly. Your mind stays malleable. Those initial tendencies prove powerful, yet avoid dictating fate. They simply represent starting coordinates. Now behold one final point meriting contemplation. Each cohort gets molded through events they cannot recollect, handed downward by guardians molded through events they could not recall properly either. This subconscious sentimental legacy travels throughout bloodlines across centuries. Nervous habits, bonding mechanisms, standard presumptions regarding whether our society remains secure, spread without anybody remaining capable of identifying that initial origin, nor deliberately choosing whether to transmit things onward. You inherited elements from your guardians which originated through their predecessors, never via tales, nor through direct instruction, but rather conditioning, mirroring that sentimental climate you inhaled throughout oldest phases before you maintained zero realization that you acquired anything whatsoever. Those recollections have vanished, yet whatever they constructed rests within you right currently, silently managing the operations across dimensions you hardly ever recognize. Those initial phases of your existence occurred. They proved vastly more significant than nearly any subsequent period. You simply remained forbidden from maintaining those invoices.